Hi, Anu.
Hello.
So you can hear us, see us?
Yes, very good.
Great.
Numita, I think we can start now.
Okay, sure. Yeah, we can begin now. Welcome, everyone, to this very exciting roundtable discussion that we have planned for you. And we are super excited because we feel that the theme of the conversation today, which is looking at different aspects of improving fuel efficiency of vehicles, it's a very important conversation and yet a very challenging conversation. Because what we have understood and what we have seen over a period of time, that today nearly everyone understands the Bharat stage emission standards, the toxic emissions from vehicles. And you see so much of reportage, conversation around how emission standards are improving from vehicles. And very recently, when we leapfrogged to Bharat Stage 6 emission standards, it caught national and international attention. But somewhere, fuel efficiency regulations, we find that the conversation, the public conversation is still very, it's kind of not so big and not so loud. And yet it kind of, worries us. We also find this quite, disturbing also, but it's also inexplicable that why fuel efficiency is something all of us understand. It's just like it's an issue of personal interest today, because with the oil prices rising and with everyone talking about how expensive petrol is, how expensive diesel is getting, the overwhelming concern today is how can we get more and more miles, more and more kilometers out of 1 liter of fuel that we burn in our vehicle. And so if this is of such a big concern, then why is it that we do not discuss this enough? And this discussion is also needed today because we want to shape the future conversation, because regulations are evolving now. And if the conversation picks up at this moment, then we will certainly be able to see very strong pathways being laid out to maximize fuel savings. Now, that's going to be the focus of our discussion today. But before we do the deep dive, I would like to introduce the panel today. And we are so happy that those who really matter in this, in this area, those who are directly involved with shaping of these regulations, informing and providing knowledge support to these regulations, and industry, the practitioner, those who are going to be taking the lead in this implementation. We have all of them around the table today. And that's why the roundtable conversation that we are looking forward to, I certainly believe it's really going to be super exciting. So let me first introduce and welcome our panelists today. And first, I would like to say this is a warm welcome from all of us in CSE. I am Anumita Roy Chaudhary. I've met many of you before from Center for Science and Environment. And I have my colleagues with me, Vivek Chattopadhyay, Senior Program Manager, Shamadi Shukla, who's the Deputy Program Manager, and along with Shupando Banerjee and Saroj Sahu, who have really helped us to put this together. This is a warm welcome to all of you. Let me now introduce you, and I take a great pleasure to introduce Mr. R.K. Khanna, who is the Director and Head of Department Transport, Petroleum Conservation Research Association. And as you all know, that this is the key institution that is taking the lead, particularly in crafting fuel economy regulations for one of the most difficult vehicle segment, the heavy duty vehicles, the trucks and buses. And that's something that we are all looking forward to, that this segment, which is also supposed to be a big fuel guzzler. We also have with us Mr. Pankaj Sharma, project engineer from Bureau of Energy Efficiency. And as you all know, that the Bureau of Energy Efficiency, which is responsible for crafting and the key part, the major, the fuel economy regulations of other vehicle segments, and especially now that they are working on, they have already crafted the passenger vehicle regulations and on their way to improving and revising them further, and also looking at fuel economy regulations for the two-wheeler segment. We are also very happy to introduce to you Mr. Anup Bandivadekar, Program Director and Regional Lead from International Council on Clean Transportation based in the US. And many of you who have already met Anup know that how deeply he's engaged and how deeply he's following the crafting of regulations in India, and also providing the most valuable knowledge support to the initiative. And we are really looking forward to Anup to learn from him that what is the learning curve from the global best practice that we can learn from, and what are the takeaway messages for India. And finally, and that's really going to be the most exciting part of the conversation, that we have Mr. Anup Bhatt, Vice President, Maruti Suzuki India Limited, and industry. He is here from the industry, very important and very valuable partner in this whole, this journey towards improving the fuel efficiency of vehicles, reducing carbon footprint of vehicles. And that the industry's role is absolutely critical. So as you can see from the way the program has been planned for today's afternoon conversation, that we are certainly looking forward to a relaxed but intense, but a very rounded conversation with so many different perspectives. We are unfortunately, ARAI, which is also supposed to participate in this conversation today, they could not make it, but nonetheless, this is a very well-represented panel, and we are really looking forward to a very exciting conversation today. To begin that, so what I'll do, because very recently, and the reason why we decided to have this conversation, so I and my colleague Vivek, both of us, we had a chance to just review that what is the current status, what's going on really, because we were very intensely involved when the first, the stage one standards were crafted way back. That was around 2014-15. Since then, a lot of things have happened. And therefore, the time has come now to again take stock and understand that where are we heading, what still needs to be done, and what do we learn from the experience so far, what do we learn from what is happening around the world, and how do we inform the future pathway. So to do that, and I want to just to kick off the conversation, I will share, let me just share my screen. I hope my screen is visible. Right. So after we did this, the policy review, a very quick, rapid review to understand the situation, it was so clear to us. And here I just want to make a few points clear, because in this room today, in addition to the experts, we also have people from different parts, from the different walks of life. And we also have who are trying to understand these regulations for the first time. And therefore, it is so important for us to understand the context of the regulation. That why is it so important to know to do this and to do this well? And very recently, when we got the IPCC report on climate change, the latest where we are heading, it is certainly an alarm bell. And all of us have understood that unless we reduce the carbon intensity, energy intensity, not only of the overall economic growth, but also of motorization, then it certainly is a bad news. And when you kind of go through and the ramble of these numbers, so when we were looking at the very recent data that has been put out by the International Energy Agency, all it is saying that how energy consumption in the vehicle sector is going to explode in the future. So energy demand for road transport will more than double over the next 2 decades. They are saying that 300 million more vehicles are going to get added between now and 2040. Oil demand is expected to increase by almost 4 million barrels per day by 2040. And they're actually saying that this could be one of the largest increase for any country. And over half of the growth to be fueled by freight transport, the trucks and the buses, the heavy duty and the commercial vehicle segment. And road freight will triple naturally because of the economic growth. And what they're saying that already the petrol and diesel consumption in the country has increased several times. And what it essentially means for us, and not only from the perspective of greenhouse gas emissions, but also from the perspective of energy security, that about 85% of crude oil is imported today. Now, unless we deal with that oil splurge, we find a way of taming the fuel guzzling, then we are going to be in deep trouble. And when you look at the difference between the domestic crude oil production and the way our imports are increasing, the way the petrol and diesel consumption increasing, it's clearly telling the whole story to us. But within that, when we are looking at the trends in a more granular way for India, what is also telling us that while different forms of transportation are going to increase, and the oil demand from different usage, like you have road, rail, domestic aviation, domestic shipping, but among those categories, it is the road transport that's going to dominate. So the yellow bar, as you can see, which is going to gallop, but also continue to dominate. And the oil is what is going to dominate that energy use. So that's where we are. And what it's also telling us that when you are running your vehicle, when there is explosive motorization in our cities, so you do get local toxic emissions from your vehicles. And all of us talking about air pollution in this country today, we know how worried we are about the particulate pollution, nitrogen oxide pollution. But what I is telling us that if we just go by that what we have committed to do in terms of the policies that we have already adopted and the way we are moving forward, with that, the toxic emissions are expected to come down from road transport over a period of time. But the CO2 emissions, the role that is going to contribute to the greenhouse gas emissions and the climate change is already such a scary unfolding story, that's going to continue to increase. So what do we do? Because at the same time, the message that we are getting from this very recent study is saying that while we need to take so many different measures to improve energy efficiency for fuel saving, but amongst the different vehicle segments, the projections are that the biggest opportunity to reduce CO2 emissions from passenger cars and freight transport. And so if that's the kind of scenario that is staring at us, the question is that what does it mean? It's just not about overall energy saving, it's about for the country, but also try and understand, as I said right in the beginning, that right now when the petrol prices are hitting 100 rupees per liter, what it means for out-of-pocket expense for each one of us. And therefore, it's just not a national story, it is just not an industry story, it is also a personal household story. That how do we reduce this expense? How can we save fuel? And that's the challenge of the regulation that we have to look at. So in that context, where is the policy of taming fuel guzzling in this sector? So let's look at one by one, because the road transport means passenger cars, two-wheelers, heavy-duty vehicles. So, and all of them will require some action. Good news is that India has already taken steps to craft and implement what they call the nomenclature for it is the corporate average fuel consumption norms for passenger cars. So just to give you, because I know I have the experts with us, but just to tell you that the stage 1 standards were implemented first in the year 2017-18. And now we are coming to that stage when we are expected to implement the stage 2 standards in 2022-23. Now, I just want to say one thing here, that the way these standards are crafted, these are very different from the way you and I understand the emission standards for vehicles. It is so easy for us to understand when we talk about Bharat Stage 6 emission standards, when we know that almost each and every make and model vehicles are taken to a lab, tested, certified, and they are ready to be sold. And that's what compliance is all about. But it is a little tricky, it is a little complicated when it comes to fuel economy standards, because this is just not a per vehicle standard like BS6, but it is about an average number. It is about sales weighted, the corporate average, which means all the makes and model of vehicles that each and every manufacturer is selling in a fiscal year. You are taking that average of that, and then you have a target for industry-wide average. And you expect that everyone collectively together will remain below that. But that does not translate into a number per vehicle, because that overall target actually varies manufacturer-wise, depending on the mix of the product that they produce, because it's a mix of small and big vehicles. And as you all know, that the big vehicles consume more fuel than smaller vehicles. So if in your fleet you have more small models, then your average is going to be low. If you have more big vehicles, your average is going to be higher. But irrespective of that, it is now left to the manufacturers to do their permutation, combination, find their sales approach, innovation, technology improvement, decide the mix of their product, and find a way of remaining within their own specific average and also within the overall industry average. Now, sounds complicated, but let's leave it at that, okay? But let's just keep these 2-3 numbers in our mind so that it helps us to create that benchmark. So if in CO2 terms, in 2017-18, the standard was about 120 grams of CO2 per kilometer. Now the next stage 2 for the cars that is supposed to get implemented in 2022-23, it is 113. And we'll come back to this later on. Now, today, for that compliance, we also know that the Ministry of Road Transport and Highways, they look at that corporate average, and they do notify and they publicize the results for each and every vehicle manufacturer. And from that, you can figure out whether the overall industry is compliant or not. So what we have in front of us right now, it overall shows that industry so far has been compliant. Now, even though, as I explained earlier, depending on their product mix, their individual levels vary, but overall they are compliant. Some show, but there are variations. Some are showing a little worsening, a little improvement, but more or less you can see that they're all compliant. But the question today is that where do we go from here? Whatever we heard, and that's why we have experts with us today who will explain to us that we are happy. The good news is that the stage 1 standards industry has been able to meet, but it also kind of coming out from the first flush of evaluation that perhaps the targets right now are more lenient and there is a scope of making them much tighter. And so the several evaluation that we have seen, actually ICCT has done the most, and we have Anu Bandivadikar with us. Essentially what they are, the evaluation that ICCT has done and also reported by IEA, they're saying that if you look at the stage 1 standard, then most of the models and the manufacturers, they are meeting the standard, and actually they are ahead of the standard, right? So they have performed well and performed in a way that the performance is actually better than the standards, to the extent that the next target that we have to meet, they are pretty close to meeting that standard as well. And what the studies are showing, that they're perhaps 7% away, and we'll hear more about that later. And clearly that's raising the question about the making the norms tighter, but there is also devil in the detail, something that we'll understand better later, because we have also understood that it is just not about meeting the value of the norm, but there are other strategies for compliance where the manufacturers are also given extra points if they adopt some predefined technological approaches. And the basic assumption there is that there are some parameters like weight, aerodynamics of the vehicles, which have bearing on the fuel efficiency of the vehicle, but they are not directly tested at the time of emission testing. But it is important to improve those parameters. So you can give extra points to the manufacturers to do more innovation and improve on those parameters. So currently, these extra credit points that are given to them, one is for electrification from fully operated battery vehicles, for hybrids and so forth. But there are also certain technology approaches like regenerative braking, start-stop system, tire pressure, 6-speed transmission, etc. Now, everyone and the conversation, the way it is veering now for the future, is saying that can we take another look at it? So while we all want electrification to happen and we want to leverage the fuel economy standards to push for electrification, but maybe we need to look at some of these predefined technology approaches, whether they are stringent enough, whether they are effective enough to accelerate the pathway. And somehow the impression and what we have begun to understand is that some of these options that you are seeing listed at the top are perhaps not so, they are ineffectual. They are actually part of regular practice in the big luxury brands, something that those models would anyway adopt. So therefore, is that the best way to take it in this direction? And that's the question that we will be raising and discussing today, that can we therefore phase out some of these and make it more more explicitly linked with the electrification requirement. And this is, I will not go into the depth of this, but just say that that this is the biggest learning that has emerged from Europe, for instance, where they have, despite having heavier vehicles than India, but they have set much tighter targets, fuel efficiency targets for their fleet. And that has been one of the most important contributory factor in pacing up the electrification of their passenger car fleet. In fact, today, if the electric vehicles in India are less than 1%, then in Europe, it is 10% of the new sales already. And that kind of brings a lot of optimism about and a lot of interest that today, when on a parallel discussion is going on, where we are also looking at building ambition for electrification, can we look at fuel economy regulation as one of the accelerators to enable that change? But we have also understood, like, the design of the regulations are so important in this case. So one of the norms, one of the credit and the extra points being given, and also the way you do the test of the vehicles, that you need to improve the testing method. And we are collectively as a community looking forward, and we are hoping that by April 2023, when the next round of real world emission regulations overall are going to come into place, that whether we will adopt tighter and more exacting driving cycle for testing cars. And if we can just do that, even with the current norms, your performance can improve. And there's a strong interest there. And we certainly feel that we need to go in that direction. And this conversation need not remain confined only to the expert and the industry, because even from the consumer perspective, today, we all have to keep in mind as regulators, as industry, and as civil society actors, that consumers now are going to become more and more conscious of the real world performance. And not only for the internal combustion engines, but also for electric cars. So therefore, we now need to make our testing methods more exacting. The future challenge additionally will also going to be that our fleet is going to move more and more towards heavier vehicles. We are already seeing the trend that where SUVs, compact SUVs, sedans are taking over. And that is kind of, it may lead to heavier vehicles, even though currently, especially after the introduction of BS6, and reduction in the sales of diesel cars, the average weight of the fleet has actually reduced in India. But we don't know how that's going to play up in the future, and something that we really need to watch. And we know that the diesel, if it's making a comeback, so the diesel vehicles may be more fuel efficient, but they are also in the bigger engine size. The petrol, the bigger engines will be less fuel efficient than the diesel counterpart, but you see a bigger clustering of smaller engines. So therefore, maybe we will see some change there. We always love to show this with ICCT's, it's one of the biggest contribution that helps everyone to understand. But the point that we want to make, that let us also understand that India cannot isolate itself anymore from what the trend in the global marketplace. That today, after the whole conversation around climate change, net zero goal, and especially so many countries declaring their targets for phasing out internal combustion engine, and also committing to much tighter targets for energy efficiency, we certainly have to understand that how that global change is going to affect the Indian market and in the Indian industry, and what should be our response mechanism. That's something we really need to keep in mind. It's good to see that even with the current norms, Bureau of Energy Efficiency has actually made an interesting point. They have said that if you compare the stage 1 standard for passenger cars and the fuel savings from the FAME 1 that we have got so far, then the fuel economy standards have been more effective in giving us better fuel savings than FAME 1. And that only kind of gives us the confidence and also the faith that if collectively we work together to improve the emission standards and have better targets and better design for the regulations, then we will certainly improve. Very quickly, I just want to flag off that so far, we have some experience and some learning in the passenger car segment because we have already implemented these standards. But today we are at the crossroad, and we are in the process of thinking about implementing the emission standard, the fuel efficiency standards for heavy duty vehicles, and also thinking about two-wheelers. Now, as far as, and we have PCRA today, and we will certainly understand a lot more about this, because we know that we took some of the early steps around 2017 when the first notification came. But then there was conversation around the design of the standard, the methods, and etc. I'm not going to go into the detail of this because we will hear about this. And therefore, there has been a delay. And now these norms, we know after introduction of BS6 emission standards have been tweaked, modified a bit, and re-notified for implementation from April 2021 onwards. So we are hoping that the implementation may perhaps have already started, but we don't know yet about to what extent. We do not know much about that do not know much about this, as not much information is available in the public domain. But this is one area that we certainly want to look and watch with a lot of interest and understand how this is going to unfold, both heavy duty and light-duty commercial vehicles. And I know that the industry and the regulators, they are conversing today, discussing the design and the approach to this, that whether, because heavy-duty vehicle standards have been designed differently from the passenger cars, should they also move towards corporate average? Will they adopt some kind of a computer-based simulation, etc.? We will understand that better today. And we will get to know how we are moving in that direction. And the final segment is the two-wheelers. Now, everyone may just say that why two-wheelers? They're already such fuel-efficient vehicles because these are the smallest engine with the smallest energy footprint. But in India, they're also so numerous. And we know that almost 60% of the petrol in India is used up by the two-wheelers. So therefore, the conversation, and I'm so happy that Bureau of Energy Efficiency has already started to look into this, and we will be very keen to understand that how are we moving forward. And we also have to understand that even in the two-wheeler segment, if you look at the shift, that you can see that the tip, that the bigger engines are also now invading the market. And that certainly requires regulations to optimize and maximize the savings from this initiative. So to close, I would like to say that while we are all looking at the role of the regulation, role of the industry, role of innovation, technology innovation, and stringency of the compliance mechanism, but we also understand that a lot of that will not be possible if you and I, as consumers, do not understand and respond to the information well enough to make our choices. And therefore, it's absolutely necessary now that you and I understand that. You know, we did this very interesting ballpark, and I must, like Vivek, when he was calculating this, you know, actually, I know we saw these numbers in one of the ICCT papers, where we found that, and we have Anup Bhatt from Maruti, so Swift Desire Petrol. So we looked at that model and how that model has improved over a period of time, right? From what it was in the year 2009 and from what it is today in 2020. And it's dramatic. If you look at it is in 2009, it was 15.9 kilometer per liter, and that improved to 24 kilometer per liter in 2020. And along with that, your weight reduced from 1,035 to 890 kg of curb weight. Now, when we looked at that data, what we did, we applied the petrol cost to that. And what we realized, and this is important for the consumers, right? That suppose if in 2009 and at the petrol cost at that level, our annual petrol cost would have been somewhere in the region of 28,000. But in 2020, when the petrol prices increased to 101, right, the cost went up to more than 42,000. But suppose if Maruti had not innovated and not improved the fuel efficiency, and suppose the Desire's fuel efficiency had continued at the level of 2009, then today, at petrol prices of 101, our annual cost would have been 64,000, more than that. So we have actually nearly 50% saving has been possible despite the increase in petrol cost and just because of this improvement in fuel efficiency. And I think that is the most powerful message of everything that we are trying to say today. And that's what we really want to realize. And therefore, we would earnestly say that time has come now for us to have a very well-regulated, transparent consumer information system to catalyze the market. I know Bureau of Energy Efficiency had started the process of start labeling. There was a draft. We are not too sure about what has happened to this, but it's something that we really need to take forward and understand how to do this better. SIAM has started voluntary disclosure. We know industry is doing that. In fact, in the December 2020, I and my colleagues, we were surveying the dealers' brochures, right? Just to see whether they are giving out the information and the data. So several of them are actually giving it, some are not, right? But it is not the way it should be, okay? So therefore, what we are saying, the time has come for us to again tap the global learning curve. One, to have a mandate like you have in European Union, that we need to give data for all new passenger vehicles. It should be made freely available. Dealers have to display that for each and every model. And the mandate on manufacturers to include fuel consumption and CO2 data. And so we need that kind of a system. We need incentives that is also linked with energy emission performance. And there are many ways that these have been implemented across the world. And also the fuel economy guide that US does. It's a very robust way of giving out information. So that's something we certainly need to look at, and we should be able to develop these systems, build consumer trust, and have a very transparent consumer information. So my last slide, and that's where the takeaway, and that's where we would really like to begin the conversation now. So from whatever we have been able to understand by looking around, we clearly feel that we really need a lot more progressive pathway now. The next decade is going to be very crucial. So first, can we stay on track to meet the stage 2 standards for cars that are scheduled to be implemented in 2022-23? And then tighten and set the next stages, the next targets for all vehicle segments, and have the periodicity of 2026, 2030, 2035. It is important to give this long-term policy visibility to the industry. And we should be able to do that. We will take a dynamic approach so that this can be adjusted as industry keeps improving, and make the targets ambitious. And we need to use this instrument to leverage this for electrification. And it's very important for us to do that. We need to reform the testing methods. We need to design flexibility mechanism more effectively, take another look at the credit system. And we understand that you are also now considering trading system. Now, again, the devil will be in the design of that. And therefore, we need a collective thought that how do we design that well? We need incentive for early action for front runners. How do we incentivize them? But based on tighter benchmark. And we need to resolve a lot of issues that are emerging now for the heavy duty segment. We need to mandate public data disclosure, and currently one, to have a complete data disclosure. Currently, even though the ministry is putting out the data for compliance, but we really do not understand that how the super credits are being given and how they are being used today. So if we can even put that out, that will also help us to influence the pathway, and of course, build consumer information system so that we can catalyze the market and intensify the bottom-up pressure for change and innovation. So that's what we have on our, something that we have been able to understand and we put on the table now. But this is only the beginning of the conversation, and we want to now take it forward from here and understand from each one of you that how do we take it from here to have very effective system and instrument in place. To do that, therefore, let me first welcome Mr. Khanna. I have introduced Mr. Khanna. We are really looking forward and to listen to you, to understand, because you are really taking the lead to craft the standards for the heavy duty vehicles. So yes, Mr. Khanna, please.
Good evening to everyone. I'm Rajiv Khanna from PCRA. As you know that we are working with the government for policy formation, and our main mandate is that we have to conserve the petroleum product in the country. As we all are aware that energy security is very important for our country. Presently, we are importing about 80% of crude oil in our country. So Ministry of Petroleum only last few days is taking some steps so that we can become self-reliant in our petroleum products. Our presently energy consumption, gas-based energy consumption is about 6 to 7%, And what our MOPNG is thinking that we are targeting about 15% energy based on gas economy. We are also planning that our domestic production, because most of the products we are importing, so we should increase our domestic production of gas and oil. For reducing import, that our government target is that we should blend ethanol, biofuel, that is ethanol, by 20% by 2025. And we are expected to meet this demand of 10% by this year, 2021-22. As earlier discussed, that electric mobility is very, very important, and government is doing a lot of things that we should switch over to electric mobility. Another area where we are thinking about production of hydrogen fuel. We are also working on different biofuels, and in fact, last 3-4 years, oil companies are working on producing 2G ethanol. They are in the process of installing 3-4 plants in the country also. Other area is on that oil diplomacy, and that is that collective bargaining, because the crude prices are very high in the world, and there is a cartel, and government is thinking that we should try our oil diplomacy so that we can reduce that oil prices. Another area in another 5-7 years, we are thinking about the export of petroleum products also. Now we are talking about the fuel economic standard. So what we have done in last 4-5 years, and we are very eager to hear that what PCRA done and what level we have reached now. It is known to everyone that in 2014 there was an empowered group of secretaries. It was decided that to reduce our fuel consumption, we should work on areas like making fuel standard for the heavy duty vehicles. And we are also aware that our already discussed in our slides also that high speed diesel consumption is increasing year to year basis. In fact, in 2014 and 15, we were our consumption was about 17 million metric ton, and it is going to reach about 83 million metric ton in 21-22. And the major consumption of diesel is accounted by heavy duty vehicles. So India has also announced its INDC target, and it aims to cut its carbon emission per unit of gross domestic product by 30-34% by 2030. So what we have done in this heavy duty vehicle, I'm just going to give you the journey. When did we have started? The notification for heavy duty vehicle was notified in August 2017, and the vehicles which were selected, it was of 12 ton and more. The gross vehicle weight of the vehicle was 12 ton and more. Now, when we have notified, this Ministry of Power has notified only, but then Ministry of MoRTH, Road and Transport Highway, they have notified the revised allowable safe axle weight. Means the vehicles which were running at 12 ton, their safe allowable weight was increased. That was done in year 2018. Now it was again came to MOPNG to PCRA that we should review the increase in weight, whether it is going to affect the line equation which we have notified in August 2017. So we took the data from ARIA and other labs and analyzed, and we were finally came to the conclusion that it is not going to affect the line equation, and the proposal was approved, and again it was sent to Ministry of Power for re-notifying the equations. But what happened that it was already decided in our country that from 1st April 2020, the BS6 introduction of vehicle was announced. So when the norms were framed, it was framed for the BS4 compliant vehicles. So since the new vehicles, BS6 vehicles were introduced from 1st April 2020, so it was decided that we should find a correction factor that will be applicable for BS compliant vehicles. So a committee was formed again then to look into it, and again we have taken the data from ARI and Shyam, the Manufacturer Association, and due to COVID again we were in trouble in last April 2020 and May. Then we got the data again. We have revisited the equation, and I am pleased to announce that the equation has been firmed up. All stakeholders have agreed, and now that even that equation has been approved, and now it has gone to Ministry of Power for notification. And I hope that in another 1 or 2 months we are going to see that notification, that final notification. There will be no CAFE norms. It will be based on equation only. And the deadline for implementation is that from January 2022, these norms will be implemented. It will come into force from 1st January 2022. Similarly, we have worked for light and medium commercial vehicle also. The norms were notified in July 2019. Again, from 1st April, all the vehicles have been introduced from BS6 compliant vehicle. Again, the equation has been revised and reviewed, approved, and again, it is going to implemented from 1st January 2022. No further delay, and equation will be notified very soon. It is with Ministry of Power only. Other areas where we are working, like it was discussed in the slide only, that fuel measurement system. Presently, the vehicles are measured based on constant speed fuel consumption method on road. So there was demand from the manufacturers also that we should also introduce a simulation tool, vector type simulation tool, which is already in implementation in Europe or other countries. So we have started work on that activity also. And in fact, we have finalized that our action plan, even the proposal, everything has been approved, and we are just waiting for the funds. And Ministry of Power is going to give us fund another 15 or maximum 1 month time, and that project will take 18 months, and we will be ready with our Bharat energy efficient tool in another 18 months time. So that will be very, very useful for measure the real-time fuel consumption through software. So that will be very, very easy for our country. Other area where we are working with BE also, tire is very, very important part of our vehicles, where and it affects the fuel consumption. It is said that the 20% of the fuel consumption is through tires only. When it moves on the road, it is rolling resistance is there. So we have developed that norms also, standard also, and it has been already final. It is approved by the Ministry of Power also. And very soon, any day you will hear that we are going to launch this. BE is going to launch this star rating of tires, and the customer, it will be very easy for the customer whether they should want to buy for tire 1, star 1, star 2, star 3. 5 range will be there for buying of this tire. So it was a long pending demand by the country that we should have this standard for the tires also. Another area which we have worked is agriculture tractors. We have also developed fuel economy norms for agriculture tractors. The committee has decided in March 2018 that we should develop this fuel economy norms for tractor. It is consuming about 7.4% of our country diesel in tractors. So we are also developed this star rating of tractors. They were because these are a non-transport road vehicle. So it is used in agricultural activities. So we have made 2-3 parameters, and single equation was derived, and star rating has been given. The file has gone to Ministry of Power, but they have asked some clarification. They have suggested some measures they have given us, but we have reviewed it, and the file is going back to Ministry of Power. Very soon it will be approved. So we are going to implement this star rating for agricultural tractors also. So these are the various initiatives the PCRA is taking, and it is almost now reaching to the final stage. So I hope with these actions, we are going to get a lot of improvement in our fuel consumption. other areas which we have talked, this initiative is taken by we, they will cover in their talk that on cars and two-wheelers. Thank you very much. Thanks.
Thank you so much, Mr. Khanna. I mean, this has really given us so much clarity because we were kind of wondering, when are the heavy-duty vehicle standards are going to get implemented? Is this 2021 or is 22? But the way you have explained it is absolutely clear now. And it's good to know that you're also now thinking about labeling systems, star rating, and certainly something that we are really looking forward to and we would love to continue to engage because it's a big opportunity. And since you are setting the terms of the change, I mean, this is certainly very, very encouraging to hear what we have heard from you. So we will discuss this more. So before that, let us now, Mr. Pankaj from Bureau of Energy Efficiency. Are you there? I can see you. Yes.
I'm here.
Yes, Pankaj Sharma. So now we really want to hear from you that you have been at it right from the beginning. And B has already done so much. And you are now planning to design the next round of passenger car standards and also two-wheelers. We have already heard about heavy-duty vehicles. So yes, Pankaj, please go ahead.
As all, I'm audible now?
Yes.
Good evening, all. Although Rajiv Khanna sir has covered most of the things, and Nitya ma'am has also covered many things in his slide. So, first of all, I would like to say thanks to CSE to provide this platform for discuss the fuel economic benchmarks, and I'm very happy to be part of this. So, I have been given the topic to way forward for the fuel efficiency regulations in India. So, as ma'am has highlighted many issues, so you can say that the pathway for the fuel economy is very critical subject because the market is very dynamic in nature and the consumer demand is changing by time. So because nowadays they are prioritizing the luxury, as ma'am has told already, that in the previous section they are. Ma'am, are you saying something? Your voice is not audible. Ma'am, your voice is not audible. Are you saying?
Sorry, no, I said, can you speak closer to the microphone?
Okay. So yes, it is good now. Okay. So as you have highlighted that the consumer are preferring the higher CC two-wheelers and the bigger size SUVs. So that is the reason the fuel economy is being deteriorated, and but again the increasing price of the petrol products that is again comes into pictures, and it enables the consumer owners to rethink about the fuel economy. So as Rajiv Khanna sir explained about the fuel economy also as heavy duty vehicles, and everyone may be aware about the CAFE norms for the M1 category. Ma'am has already highlighted the same. So phase 1 is already implemented in India from 2017, and second phase will be implemented soon. So and as based on the 2016 weight data, the average vehicle mass value is also to be revised, and the same is under consideration of the Ministry of Power. So when the revised value of the average vehicle mass value will be notified, that will be used for the second phase, and that is commence from the April 2020. So apart from the heavy duty vehicles and passenger cars, the norms for the light and medium commercial vehicles was notified in July 2019 also. But because of the implementation of BS6 emission norms, those norms become obsolete, and now we are deriving a correction factor which has been finalized also. And we are in the process to notify that correction factor, which will be implemented on the BS4 equation values. To that will be become eligible for the BS6 compliant vehicles. Also, we have finalized the star rating program for the particular types. So that is also ready to be launched. The same was to be launched in the Amrit Mahotsav and was to be launched by the minister, but because of some busy schedule, It has been scheduled for the next month, but that will be launched most probably in the next month. And we are working the development of the fuel economy norms for the two-wheelers also. The technical committee has already been constituted, and the norms is expected to be finalized soon. The norms will be on CC based or vehicle weight based. That will be decided by the committee itself. And once it is finalized, that will be notified, and most probably that will become effective from the next financial year. So almost all of the category of the vehicles has been covered. For every category of the vehicles, the norms has been notified. So what, as ma'am already told, that the testing methodology should be taken care also. And Rajiv sir has also highlighted that we are in the process to develop the vehicle energy consumption tool, like which is implemented in the European Union, and that is being adopted in the Indian specific conditions by ARAI, and we are in the process for the development of that tool also. So the pathway, what we have chosen, we have learned many things from our past errors, and many of the things has been covered in the slides also. So what our priority is for the next phases of the fuel efficiency norms, that the norms should be more closer to the real driving fuel efficiency. So that will be give a better picture for everyone. And also, apart from developing the norms from our side and complied by the manufacturers, so some extra efforts need to be done by the consumer side also. So it is so the push can be given by some incentive mechanism, or as ma'am said, the fuel economy leveling, the capacity building of the drivers, or so we are also looking to develop such type of mechanism so that the a push can be given to the fuel efficiency norms. Also, we are developing a credit debit mechanism for the manufacturers, which enable the overachievers to get some extra because of their from their achievements also. And what we are trying to keep in mind the technological advancement and the fluctuating market also. So we are in process to conduct a study to address the technological advancement and the market trend and the consumer demand, so that the norms which will be developed for the next phases, that will be become more effective. So the study will analyze the market trend up to 2030 or maybe 2040, the penetration of the technology to improve the fuel efficiency and the cost benefit analysis also. So we have to keep tracking the variation of the market and upcoming technologies, and so that we can tap more and more fuel saving. But on the other hand, the safety and quality should not be also compromised. So one more thing that we have faced a lot, that as Rajiv sir told, that the fuel efficiency norms for the heavy duty vehicles need to be amended 2 times. And again, we are in the process to notify the correction factor. First, it was to be amended because of the safe accelerated limit revision, and now it is being revised because of the BS6 emission norms notification. So what we are doing, that for the next phases of the fuel efficiency norms, we are taking care that the if the other norms, like maybe the weight revision, maybe the emission revision, or some other things, that needs to be synchronized. All the other government departments, maybe Minister for Transport and Highways or some other, those they are also notifying the norms. So we are also tracking those notification of those norms, so that this type of issues should not come again and again. So also many things has been covered already, like we have the norms should be taken care that that should be tightened for the next phases, and the dynamic to the market fluctuations also. The testing methodology, I've already told that we are developing the vector tool, but other testing development methodologies should be also be taken care. And also the credit debit mechanism, as ma'am said, the incentivized for the early and action and the front runners also. So these things we are taking care for the next phases of the norms, and these norms should be notified in such a manner that the manufacturer get extra time to develop their vehicles to comply those norms. So that's it from the my side. you.
Fascinating. So, I mean, you've really given us the pathway that, we're not very clear about that how you're approaching this, but we'll come back to you because there's a lot more that we really want to understand that how you're going to move forward. But before that, if we can first listen to Anu Bandivadekar from International Council for Clean Transportation, so that we also understand the emerging learning curve, the global curve. And then we will come back to you, Prashant. That will be really very helpful. Anu.
Thank you, Anumita. It's great to be here, and I do have some slides, and we'll see how quickly I can get through them. And I split this in two parts, one on two-wheelers, for which we yet don't have standards, and we could have standards soon. And then the second on passenger car side, and we can discuss heavy duty during Q&A side, but I didn't really put together materials on that. But it's really heartening to know that the beat may be under development. So we'll look forward to engaging more on that front. So mostly what I'm going to present on two-wheelers is really contained in some of our recent publications. They've all sort of come out earlier this year. And some more papers are coming on two-wheelers front, tracking the market, analyzing the technologies, costs, benefits, etc. So this is the work of my colleagues Sunita, Anup, and Ashok Dev, and I'm presenting that here. The two-wheeler market, we know it's about 70% motorcycles, about 30% scooters. Most of it, more than half of it is really motorcycles less than 55 or 150 cc. Electric two-wheelers, although growing and making lots of noise, are a tiny part of the market. And that's mostly because if you look at who the market leaders are, Hero MotoCorp don't yet have electric two-wheeler on the market. Honda doesn't have any plans at this time. TVS and Bajaj have got one electric two-wheeler that they are selling. Each of them are selling in 6 cities only across India. And so there's no wonder that, once you include Royal Enfield, Yamaha, and Suzuki, that's 99.8% of the market in India for two-wheeler sales. And so between them, they have got very few electric options. So it's pretty much whatever we hear about electric two-wheeler is startups, and they're not really that big in their volume compared to these major players. The other important thing that I think it's written is now two-wheelers have got fuel injection systems on them with Bharat 6 emission standards coming into effect last year. And that's a really big deal. Not only did having fuel injection instead of a carburetor on two-wheelers has made it possible to meet BS6 emission standards, to have a 3-way catalytic converter on the two-wheelers for emission control purposes, but it now enables a whole host of engine technologies that can be deployed on these vehicles going forward so that they can become more fuel efficient. So we've looked at basically all of these 3 different market segments: small motorcycles, big motorcycles, and scooters, where they are currently in their technology thing on engines and transmission, and where they might go in terms of future technologies. And all of this long list of technologies, whether they're on engines, on transmissions, on improving rolling resistance and hybridization, or other engine modifications, they are all in place already on the car side, not so much on the two-wheeler side. And we evaluated which one of these will be applicable for small motorcycles, in scooters, in large motorcycles. And as you can see, not every technology can apply to every market segment. So you have to really choose that technology applicability in that particular context. So we look at how effective each one of these technologies is, and we sort of arrange them in their increasing order of cost to the benefit. And you get a chart that looks something like this. The key result of this is that you could achieve something like 42% emission reduction or fuel consumption reduction in these small motorcycles through a range of technologies that are possible on that particular front. And we've developed similar chart for a large motorcycle, for a scooter, etc. So you've got all of that analysis available. As I said, this is a similar looking chart for scooters. Not all technologies are similar in motorcycles and scooters. And one of the most important things on scooter side is going to be improvements in transmission side, which unlike on motorcycles, they have got continuously variable transmissions, which need special improvements compared to motorcycle transmissions. That's what defines those two separately. Throw into this mix electric two-wheelers. And what this chart is showing is what is the upfront cost of mid-range electric motorcycles. By mid-range, we mean 150 kilometers of electric real-world performance. And today, if you look, compared to the ICE electric two-wheeler, with no incentive, the electric two-wheeler will cost many times, almost 3.5 times the cost of ICE two-wheelers. When the FAME 2 incentives are taken into effect, the costs reduce quite a bit dramatically. When you take into account that last month the government proposed modifications to the FAME 2 scheme with even more generous incentives, now the cost of the solid magenta line that is much closer to ICEs. And then in many places like Delhi, Maharashtra, Gujarat, etc., now there are additional state level incentives that are further bringing down the cost of buying an electric two-wheeler, so that essentially by next year or the year after that, when all these incentives are taken into account, the upfront cost, the cost on which you take out a loan or pay an EMI, that will be the same for electric and ICE vehicles. And so that's very, very important. So that we take into consideration. The costs shown here are without incentives. So when we do take standards calculation, we don't count on the incentives, but in actual practice, actually, the consumers will be able to take advantage of them. But the most important finding that we have is that the payback period, the payback that the consumer is going to get by manufacturers having adopted these advanced technology is actually smaller for electric two-wheelers than some of the advanced ICE technologies that you see here, which may have, some of the lower efficiency ICE technologies may have a payback period of 3 to 4 years, but some of the higher efficiency ICE technologies may have payback periods of as much as 5 or 6 years. The electric two-wheelers, according to our calculations, have a payback period between 3 and 4 years at present, which makes them very, very cost effective to implement on two-wheeler front. So manufacturers will have a choice. So when Bureau of Energy Efficiency comes out with a vehicle fuel consumption standard or a CO2 standard for two-wheelers, the manufacturers will have a choice. They could either improve, fuel efficiency of internal combustion vehicles, that is shown on this y-axis, or they could add more and more electric vehicles in their fleet, or they can do some combination of the two, that they can have some electrification and some ICE efficiency improvements. And so if India, which is our government, has set the target for about 30% or more electric share on two-wheelers, if the standards are set very, very low, below this 28 grams of, or, above this 28 grams of CO2, etc., there are going to be a lot of IC technology improvements that are going to be very, very cost effective, and very low EV market share may be required. That you could achieve most of them really by going here into that space with very low EV market share and mostly ICE technology improvements. If we set standards that are more strict, around 25 grams or 20 grams in this kind of a space, then rather than choosing the expensive ICE technologies that are going to be there, manufacturers will choose and gravitate towards having more and more electric two-wheelers in their marketplace. And so setting these standards appropriately will really give India a big boost, not just in terms of improving efficiency of ICE two-wheelers, but also getting good market share of electric two-wheelers. And so how these standards are set in terms of stringency is very important. So our estimation is that if we set 2025 standards at around 25 grams of CO2 per kilometer, then we'll get about 30% market penetration of electric two-wheelers. If by 2030, we set a standard for 20 grams of CO2 per kilometer, then we'll get nearly 60% market penetration of electric two-wheelers. So this is going to be a very important lever for us to think about the stringency of these standards. As I said, not that these cannot be met with ICE technologies alone, but it'll be actually far more cost effective to meet them using electric two-wheeler technology. We also have in the forthcoming work some proposals for doing star labeling of two-wheeler, these ICE two-wheelers, and the same sort of 5-star methodology that BEE has can be applied, and this can be discussed and debated further. So I'll sort of move on from the two-wheeler side into the four-wheeler side now. Anumita showed this a version of this chart before, but now this is at least as of last month the update of this chart, particularly made after European Union proposed their 2035 regulations for passenger vehicles. As you can see, at present, European Union is at 95 grams of CO2 per kilometer. The standards are tightening to around 80 grams per CO2 per kilometer in 2025, 43 grams of CO2 per kilometer in 2030, and down to 0. Effectively, there will be an internal combustion engine phase out across European Union by 2035 if the current proposal is finalized. It is still, maybe a year away from getting finalized, but it's nearly there. So where is India in that game, right? Like we are here at 113 grams of CO2 per kilometer target for fiscal year 22-23. So quite a bit relaxed compared with Europe's 95 grams. And as you can see, other countries, Japan, South Korea, have already gone ahead and proposed standards for 2030. So we have benchmarks for Japan, Korea, and Europe already there for 2030. So nothing really should stop us from going ahead and setting our own benchmark for 2030, somewhere in this range, essentially, matching these kinds of efficiency targets. Anumita mentioned, that in Europe, as of last year, 2020, more than 10% of new vehicles sold were electric drive, plug-in hybrids or battery electrics, but also, pretty significant jump in hybrid market share, 12% or so that happened just in the last year. And the reason really it happened when on the right-hand side, you see India data. We don't see any such jump in hybrid uptake. We don't see any such jump in electric vehicle uptake. And the main reason for that really was that in 2020, the European Union standards of 95 grams went into effect. These 107 grams, unfortunately, that's a mistake on my part. The 107 grams is without the flexibility mechanisms and 97 grams with flexibility mechanism. So this chart really shows what happened in the past decade. That for nearly the last decade, Europe and India tracked their new passenger vehicle CO2 emissions nearly the same. I mean, Europe was worse, and then they caught up, and they're more or less tracking each other until last year. And until last year, when Europe's 95 grams target went into effect, manufacturers really rushed to deploy hybrids. They really rushed to deploy plug-in hybrids and electric vehicles into the fleet. so that their targets really diverge from India. And as I said, India's target for 22-23 is here. Europe's 2025 target is down here. So this trend is only going to accelerate in Europe going forward. And if we continue on a flatter trajectory, we are only going to get these older IC technologies. Nothing wrong with improved IC technology, but the divergence between European market and Indian market is only going to grow in the coming years. We are seeing the pace of change in Europe being quite dramatic. So, this 10% and more was last year. This is the data as of June of this year. By year to date, 2021, that market share of plug-in hybrid and battery electric is already at 16%. In the month of June itself, it reached almost 20%. So in Germany, a market like Germany right now, nearly 23-24% of new vehicles being sold are either plug-in hybrid or electric drive. That's the kind of transformation in the market that these stringent CO2 standards can bring. And India needs to look in that direction to really strengthen these standards going forward. I think Anumita showed some of this data, so there is, I wouldn't really go into the detail of this particular information. Basically, some of the manufacturers already meet 22-23 standards. That's again because Volvo and MG have been introducing electric vehicles as part of their fleet, so they've already comfortably met the 22-23 standards. Most others still have quite a bit of work to do to go ahead, and some are clearly lagging. Right, Force Motors, Isuzu, they're probably not going to make it in terms of compliance with 22-23 standards unless there is some dramatic change in their product lineup. The flexibility mechanisms that Anumita described in, this is sort of the documentation of how well they are being utilized by manufacturers. Some of them, and like regenerative braking and start stops are now starting to get deployed, and we expect to see this start stop system share jump quite a bit next year further. The same sort of on 6-speed transmissions and tire pressure monitoring systems. So we expect a lot more use of these flexibility mechanisms in meeting the standards of 22-23. So my colleague Ashok really put together this chart that's sort of showing, okay, if this is where we are, how can the manufacturers meet the 22-23 target? And we've got multiple pathways to get there. Some of them are going to be, these low-cost IC technologies, just improve engine oils, lower viscosity engine oils, low resistance tires, aerodynamic improvement. I mean, these incremental technology improvements that can get us some benefit in the near term. They can be a lot bigger in longer term, but just in the next couple of years, that's what we can expect. You could sort of increase CNG market share. You could increase all of the flexibility mechanisms. You can increase EV share to 1%. That'll get you, this kind of reduction. You can increase hybrid share up to 5%, and that can give you, another 3 grams of reduction and so on. So if all of them are taken into account, then the performance can be as low as 105 grams of CO2 per kilometer. The target's only going to be about 113.7 going forward. So it's there are going to be multiple pathways. Anumita actually brought up this particular example that we documented, which is really a great example of how gradual, low-cost changes over time can be deployed, and manufacturers are deploying to make conventional vehicles quite a bit more efficient. This is really an amazing and exemplary, I would say, what Maruti has done with the Desire model, starting with 2008 and moving through time. You see CO2 emissions dropping, but you also see the weight of the vehicle dropping. So by using more lightweight materials, by designing the car better, etc. And remember, all through this time, the vehicle's gotten more safe. It's added more electronics and other technology. It's added emission control technology. So you can just see the amount of engineering effort that has gone into it to improve this kind of a vehicle over the last decade. And the existing model, like actually, 2 years ago, the 2020 AMT models comfortably exceeded the 22-23 standard on gasoline front. The diesel model is discontinued for now, so I'm really not spending time on that. But again, we saw similar kind of improvements happening on gasoline as well as diesel cars. And this is one example. I think we could track multiple model examples like this that have been quite instrumental in making improvements. I just wanted to show this quickly to say, okay, how much impact has the BS6 transition really had on fuel economy or CO2 emissions? So on y-axis, you see the BS6 CO2 emissions from models in India. And on x-axis, you see BS4 CO2 emissions. So 1:1 correspondence will tell you that basically there was no impact. And you will, of course, see that, in case of individual models, things are better or worse. For some model, BS6 vehicles are more efficient than their BS4 counterparts. In some cases, BS4 vehicles have lower CO2 value than their BS6 counterparts. There is no thing, but by and large, it's centered very much around this 45-degree line showing 1:1 correspondence. That yes, BS6 transformation has been a big impact, but the manufacturers really ensured that the fuel economy doesn't really deteriorate over this transition. I don't think I'm going to have time to share this part. Let me just quickly say that for light commercial vehicles, by that I mean 3.5 tons and less, the Tata Ace type of or Mahindra Bolero, pickup type of vehicles, India currently doesn't have a standard. So that's one category that is left behind in some ways, that PCRA has regulated 3.5 tons and above medium and heavy duty vehicle standard. B has M1 category passenger car regulation, but this segment is completely unregulated. So along with two-wheelers, this is the other segment that needs to be regulated going forward. There is more work coming forward on hybridization and potential for hybrid vehicles in India. It's still at a draft phase, but early results of our work are telling us that we could achieve 20-25% reduction in fuel consumption from hybridization at a cost of roughly 1,600 rupees per every percentage reduced. So it's not cheap, but it's not backbreaking in terms of its cost to deploy these technologies with very, very meaningful fuel consumption reduction in the near term. So more on that, in coming days. So I kind of wanted to end on a maybe a little more provocative note that what do we need to do on these standards going forward? So I think Kanumita actually mentioned this. I agree that we need to change to WLTP testing as soon as possible. Pankaj mentioned that we don't want to go through these revisions again and again and again. And I think we should do this once and for all, after April 2023, once the present standards are implemented for 22-23 next year. Once that compliance is done, then we move on to WLTP. And basically, we don't even have to change the standard line. We just keep the same equation. We just say, okay, now manufacturers should comply on the basis of WLTP, which means that they will have to improve technology to go from current testing regime to WLTP testing regime. But and they'll require some time, 1 to whatever years that are necessary to make that happen. But then going forward, we should really think, can we apply the European pathway with, about a 4-year lag on emission standards? We've sort of, taken that 4 to 5 year lag. Can't we do that on the CO2 standards as well? If we did that, we'll sort of be looking at targets, something like this. Looking at from 113 grams next year or the year after that for on the basis of WLTP, you take another 4 or 5 years, get down to the European Union's 95-gram target that is kind of around today. So this is where EU is going to be there. And keep ratcheting it down. As I said, EU target for 2025 is 81 grams on DC terms, 43 grams in 2030, and 0 in 2035. Can we aspire to something like that of a trajectory? And the same for the light commercial vehicles. Can we aspire to a trajectory that doesn't quite match up to EU, but follows it, in a relatively close succession? So thank you. I think I took quite a bit of time, but I hope it's useful in the conversation.
Thanks a lot, Anup. That's fascinating. And that also kind of brings out the level of ambition that we are talking about. And it's a perfect connect with what Anup from Maruti is going to tell us. And Anup, you have already heard Anup saying, that clearly, as you said, stringent benchmark for the technology, how that actually flips the chart and the balance more towards going for zero emission targets, because IC engine beyond a point are going to become more and more complex and expensive. And so from that perspective, how do you perceive the pathway in the future in this direction? And keeping in mind the transformative changes that we're talking about in the global market today. Yes.
Thanks, Anumita, and thanks, Anup, for setting the context as usual. So we keep meeting at these conferences, and it's great to hear from you as well. I have a few slides which I thought maybe I can share so that I can bring out our kind of just a moment. Yeah, is it visible to everyone?
Yes, we can see it.
Okay, thanks. So basically, I took the topic today. It's on benchmark for an energy efficient and climate secure world. So just some thoughts which I wanted to share here is that whenever we talk about fuel economy regulations, so there are two things which become important from Indian perspective. I think it's about energy security as well as GHG reduction. Both of them sometimes, most of the times, also complementing each other as such. So where is India as far as GHG or energy security perspective? So just a few points which I wanted to share is that we have to kind of understand where India is today. These are two graphs from one of the reports, Climate Action Tracker, which says that if you look at the EU report, these bars, it's a little complicated report in terms of emissions of CO2 equivalent on a yearly basis on the y-axis and time on the x-axis. So just to simplify, this black curve, if this black curve passes through any of these green or the dark green, then you are actually on the path of 1.5 degree increase in temperature target. And anything above this green, this yellow or orange or red, would mean that you are beyond that, whether it's about less than 2 degrees or 2 to 3 degrees and so on. And if you look at EU, they are nowhere near 1.5, neither is Japan. That's primarily because of their historical emissions and so on, and the COP21 targets, which are based on fair share policy and so on. Whereas if you look at India, India is placed quite well. We are actually at 1.5 degree, increase in temperature target. So we are well within that. So 2020 has brought it down a little bit, but we are there. Of course, in 2050, this curve has to actually bend down, and it has to come back here. So there is some work which is there, but as far as current scenario is concerned, we are placed in a comfortable spot. And whatever was spoken in terms of the targets which European Union has talked about, whether it's 2035 bye-bye to ICE, is all driven by this. It has to be like that. It has to be, if EU has to meet their COP21 targets, they will have to do that. India doesn't have to do that. India is placed comfortably here, and India has its own targets as well. Now, India set its own INDCs for 2020, which were already met in 2016, and the INDCs for 2030 we should be able to meet maybe by 2024, 6 years in advance. So we are on the way to achieve our intended targets. So that's as far as India is concerned. So although now we are a fourth largest GHG emitter, but historical and per capita GHG emissions are extremely low, and we are on the path, whereas European Union is not. So they will have to work harder compared to India to meet their COP21 targets. So the actions that you see have to be benchmarked against the context, which is probably the message which is coming out from the presentation that I'm making. Now, if you look at overall transport sector, sorry, let me push it here. If you look at the transport sector emissions have been increasing, of course, because of the increase in number of vehicles on the road today. Industry and electricity has also gone up pretty high. Now, if you compare transport sector GHG over the complete GHG from India, and this is from the IEA report 2021, which was referred by Anumita-san also, 15 or 13% comes from transport. Now 13%, in this 13%, cars, which is the subject of the discussion right now, is only 2.26%. And how does Europe compare to that? Is 15%, or rather, let us say 29% comes from transport, and out of that 15% is from passenger cars. So 2.26% compared with 15%. So that's not a fair comparison when we talk about the mitigation measures which have to be taken. Of course, there has to be focus. 15% is much more than trucks and buses in European Union. 5%. That 5% is almost equivalent to India 5%, whereas passenger cars is 5 times as high as India. So with this, actually, the regulations which need to be mandated also have to be tuned, or have to be understood from this context. Like, what is the contribution that these vehicles have? So this is all about GHG matter. Now let's look at the another aspect of energy security imperative. Now, this is 2016 data, maybe a little old, from PPAC. Now, out of a total roughly 200 million metric tons a year of crude consumption, 69 is consumed in the transport sector, which is roughly 1/3 of the crude. And out of the total crude consumption, only 4.3% is consumed by cars. This is again a very nominal figure. So whenever we are talking about fuel economy regulations, so let's be very clear that we have been able to so-called what Anumita said, tame this 4.3%. So this we have not been able to handle 18.9 or 8.3 to that extent, but of course it is in the works, and something is already decided for 2022-23. But we have been able to only take care of this 4.3. So it has to be meted with that hand. How Government of India and also industry and we at Maruti are looking at it, of course, If you look at Suzuki's environment policy, very clearly, Suzuki says that we have to reduce by 40% from 2010 levels, and electrification and biofuels and CNG, particularly in the Indian aspect, becomes very, very important. Now, if you look at ethanol blends, ICCT report, Anup belongs to ICCT. I read that report. It says the Indian biofuel policy 20% by 2030 may be met by 2040. So that's a scenario that they looked at. Of course, maybe in 2019, that would have been the scenario. Whereas today we are already at, we would be doing 20% by 23. In the next 2 months, probably India, the entire country will be covered with E10. That's the figure which is coming from MOPNG already. 1100 crore liters, 1400 crore liters in 2027 or 2030, and another 300 crore liters coming if we are able to implement the FFV in India. So that's 1700 crore liters, which can actually displace roughly around 17-18% of crude oil. I mean, crude oil which is consumed by both two-wheelers and cars which consume gasoline. So this is basically for gasoline blend. So it can actually displace this 20%. So it's a huge jump from energy security perspective. Now, of course, it also helps in GHG reduction, especially with bioethanol. We do see a reduction in GHG coming because of this. By the way, Brazil considers E100 as kind of carbon neutral that way. So, and India would not be very different from that, being an agricultural economy. Now, we also are focused on CNG. As we know, CNG sales last year were already at 6% in the last financial year. And if you look at the CNG spread which is going to happen, Government of India is very serious about these 10,000 CNG stations by 2030, and along with that 5,000 bio CNG stations in 2030. I'm particularly excited about this bio CNG thing, which is catching on in India. Reason being that it's a revolution which is happening, where in places where this grid, the CNG grid is not accessible. You have these 5,000 stations, a station in every district. That is the mandate coming up. And you have a bio CNG which is using local bio waste and converting that into bio CNG and using that locally. Today, our CNG vehicles are being sold in very non-traditional markets which now have bio CNG. So we are tying up with and looking at this change which is happening in the country. And I would not imagine any bio or carbon negative fuel where you take the local waste and convert it kind of in situ into fuel and use in situ into your vehicles. And it's not a small potential, it's a huge potential of 60 million metric tons a year, which can primarily fuel the entire CNG fleet of vehicles. So it's a huge change which is happening. So it's a complete change in GHG reduction which can happen because of CNG, bio CNG particularly, and also higher blends of ethanol. Now this will take care of energy security imperative as well as the GHG reduction potential. Now that's the way to go for India. Of course, we are looking at fuel economy regulation. 2022 is the next stage of regulation. We are working towards it, although COVID has played a spoil sport in this. Our engineering departments have not been able to function the way we would have liked them to do. And the government discussions are on what to do with this 2022, but we are at it. We are at improving our vehicles. As Anup also said, vehicles have improved. He gave the example of Desire. But if you look at all the vehicles put together, an average vehicle in 2022 would be around 26% better off in fuel efficiency terms from a 2005 baseline. It's not a small number compared to 2005. It's a huge reduction. But at the same time, considering that the older vehicles are still on the roads, there is a fleet renewal policy in the offing. We should, if the older vehicles go off, then it's a very quick jump in energy savings that we can accrue, to India. We talked about electrification. Of course, all of us are working on electrification. Looking at electrification today in the current context with the kind of energy scenario which is there with the huge dependence on fossil fuel or coal-based energy or electricity, it is definitely not good, and not just in terms of well-to-wheel CO2, where probably today a CNG and an EV is head-on-head with each other, but primarily also from a local pollution perspective. I mean, may not be local, but in terms of criteria pollutants, a four-wheeler electric vehicle is not as good, considering the SOx, NOx particulate emissions coming from the electricity generation. So that's definitely something we need to work on. We need to work on this transition to happen between to electrified vehicles, hybrid vehicles, and electric vehicles. We also need this transition to be at a pace where the electricity consumption or the electricity production is also shifted towards more and more renewable energy. So that's something which India needs to look at in this transition towards electrification. Some of the Scandinavian countries in Europe, they don't need to worry about it because most of it is electricity is coming from renewable sources, maybe even France. But for India, I think it's a different story. We need to really work on this as well. There was a talk about comparison between India and the European regulations. 2018, there was a study done by ICAT which said, because of BS6, the stringency level has actually gone up to meet the same 113 target. It is actually equivalent to 102 with lesser number of diesel vehicles and also the change in the testing procedure. We also did a small check. If we compare our typical vehicle from India, we used to also export vehicles to Europe, but the specifications are different. The specifications are different because in Europe, you don't have to worry about potholes and speed breakers. You can have more aerodynamic designs, lesser road clearances, better tires. You don't have to worry about durability of tires. So those are, and of course the fuel specification 91 to 95, that really gave an advantage to the European specification of the same vehicle. Like, for example, we used to have a Baleno, which we used to sell in Europe a couple of years back. And there is Baleno in India. And there is a difference between the CO2 levels coming from these two engines or vehicles, primarily coming from their build because of their tire setup, because of their chassis heights, considering the European and the Indian market. So there is this unfair comparison which is sometimes made between 113 versus 95, but actually there is some equivalence somewhere if you consider all of these aspects put together. ICAT also did a study in terms of how much is the cost up going to happen as we move from.
Can you please speed up a little bit?
Yeah, I think I have only one slide after this. There is a cost up which is going to happen, and customers will have to pay for this additional cost. And some of these technologies that we are going to put don't really have a payback period. That brings to the one of the last slides which I have is that whenever we talk about fuel economy, we can't really only look at one aspect of technology and putting all the technology on the vehicles. We have to look at the customer. our GDP per capita is extremely low. Buying power is extremely low. You can also see the increase in cost, which has actually eroded the value from the smaller cars, and people find more value in the bigger cars today because of the add-on costs, which have actually made it a little more, not lucrative for people. 6% was the cost increase or price increase for vehicles from 2003 to 2018, and we see this already going to 25% in 2022-23, and it's going to impact the growth of the industry. We already see a CAGR reduction from 10.3 to 3.6, and if you look at last year's sales, they were at similar levels at 2015-16. So there is actually there's already an impact on the growth, which was already there at pre-COVID levels and also got accentuated post-COVID as well. So as your topic talks about benchmark, I feel benchmark has to be contextual. India is definitely different from other countries. Our goals are different. Our resources are different. We have different strengths and also weak points. And we need to take cognizance of all of these and draw our unique path to achieve energy security and GHG for a long-term sustainable development. So that's all from my side. Thanks a lot, Anugata.
Thanks a lot, Amit. Anu. So I understand the view that you are taking. It is kind of a reductionist view that if India is not so much trapped in the heat trapping gases, not such a big contributor, within that transport sector is also a small contributor, and within that car is even smaller contributor. And then you can deal with a lot of that with different kind of fuels and decarbonizing the fuel. And then somewhere then we are looking at the fuel efficiency regulations and electrification as a small part of the solution. Now, I think that's where we are kind of seeing these different strands coming together. So we have just heard our regulators, and regulators kind of are pretty optimistic. And what I really like that they are pretty much on their way to define their regulations, set the terms, and saying that we are going to do this. So the terms are going to be set very quickly. And we are hoping that we will see much stronger benchmark. And from what we have seen from the global experience, that there is huge transformation happening already. And the question is, should we align quickly with that pace of transformation? And the other view that we are looking at, and what we have seen, the data that has emerged from the conversation today, that despite everything, there seems to be a lot of potential and opportunities in already the way technology pathways are unfolding in India. I mean, Maruti itself has demonstrated such dramatic improvement. And maybe somewhere we have to bring all these pieces together to ensure that our regulations really maximizes the gain. And I always like to see this data that all of you talk about, that the natural rate of progression in the industry is actually better than what the regulations have asked you to do, so which shows that there is an enormous potential in the industry to do a lot better and meet a much stringent benchmark. So looking at the time, and I know we are really running short, so that's why I would like to ask each one of you that what do you see as the immediate how would you prioritize the key steps that we now need to take to ensure that we accelerate the fuel economy gains with regulations and whatever related instruments that are available to us? So how do we do that? And how do we also make that next big transition to electrification? Because somewhere it looks like the way everything is evolving all around, there seems to be an element of inevitability in that pathway. I mean, the way things are unfolding. I mean, we can try and stave that off, delay that, but is it to our advantage to delay that process? Does it even make economic sense to delay that process? I'm not even talking about environmental issue. Okay, so from that perspective, what is your takeaway and how you feel about it? So do we begin with Mr. Khanna?
My views are that we have now going to implement this fuel economy norms for heavy duty vehicles, which is the biggest consumption of diesel in our country. So we are going to implement from 1st January 2022, but now we are going to work for the phase 2 norms also, because this is the phase 1. So where phase 1, we have selected that the 50% of our vehicles should meet the norms. Now we are going to work and we will try to implement the second phase. And our target should be that we should be able to meet another 2 years. And the target will be that our existing 80% of the vehicles should meet those norms. So that will be a big jump, and that will very, very much benefit our this fuel consumption levels. And second, I already discussed that we should implement the other things also, like we are developing vector tool. This is very, very beneficial for our industry. Then we should implement this tire and other things also that is going to definitely move forward for our this fuel consumption things. Thank you. Ma'am, we aren't able to hear you.
Sorry. No, this is so encouraging, and it gives us so much hope that you are pretty much set on that path, and great to hear that you are setting the next level of benchmark and also looking at all the ancillary aspects of it to ensure that we really get and maximize the fuel gas, and particularly dealing with a very difficult segment. But that's where one of the biggest opportunity lies. So we are very happy to hear this and looking forward to the next round of regulations that you are going to frame now. Mr. Sharma, your reflection and opinion?
Ma'am, first of all, I would like to say that our priority is to first implement the norms which are being revised nowadays, because I have already, sir has already told that norms were revised because of the change in the other safe axle weight limits and emission norms also. So we are struggling hard to implement those norms also, as such told that the STB norms are being implemented as proposed to be implemented from 1st January 2020. So once after just after the implementation of those norms, we will initiate the process to develop the norms for the second phase also, and we will try to make in such a way that, as you said, the target should be the efficiency, and that should support the economy also.
So, Mr. Sharma, if I just want to ask you a follow-up question, how are you planning the timeline for your revisions and notification to be able to give each time to the industry?
Yes, that has been already planned by the committee itself. We have already proposed the timeline to be implemented as 1st January 2022 for the SDV and the light and medium commercial vehicles. And for the M1 category norms, the first phase is already under implementation, and the second phase is to be implemented from 1st April 2022, as all are aware about it. So we are also planning to develop the norms for the two-wheelers till the end of this year, and that we will plan to implement as soon as possible, because we are already running very schedule.
Absolutely. Because you are really dealing with the most critical instrument. And I understand that, I mean, what we are hearing also from the industry, they may want to have a more relaxed timeline, but so much is on you now to actually design it well and also decide the timeline. So absolutely, that's where the whole opportunity is for us. I'm actually looking at the time now. I understand that, we have kind of overshot the time. But before I go to Anup from ICCT, I would like to ask Anup from Bharati. Anup, I mean, what I really want to understand that it kind of, there is a sense that Indian industry doesn't see a quick opportunity in the frontier technologies. And I mean, we have seen the transformation in China and other places where, and there's a conversation that India could have perhaps taken the opportunity to lead the game of electrification. And, we have always lagged behind as far as IC engine is concerned, right? And if we can do electrification well, it can also be part of our industrialization policy, industrial policy. And also there could be other benefits of staying ahead in that game and in that curve. So why are we still hesitating about this? I mean, there is a hesitation in the industry. But what is very interesting at the same time in India, that while the conventional OEMs are still hesitant, but you are seeing new investment and the new players coming in, and they want to take the opportunity of the new investments and the new trajectory. So how is that going to play out in India? And therefore, how do you think Indian industry should plan and strategize to deal with that, when you know that the net zero goal pressures are also going to build up on India very soon? I mean, despite all the numbers you gave us, we will not be able to stay insular from this, for very long. So, your reflection.
First of all, whatever numbers I gave was only to set the context or put it into context, that we cannot simply look at Europe is net zero. They're looking at zero CO2 from vehicles, new vehicles in 2035, and say that's the benchmark. They are doing that because of their own compulsions. As far as India is concerned, we see. Of course, electrification is going to be there. I think most of the manufacturers are seriously looking at it. There are some manufacturers who already have models already in the market today, and rest of us are already, things are at different stages of development phases, and you will see more vehicles coming in towards maybe in the next few years, 2-3 years. You will see this heating up as far as the electrification path is concerned. Why is it not becoming? Why are people not catching up to this? Is also coming from the customer perspective. There is a strata of people who are purchasing the vehicles today, very small numbers. We are mass producers as such, but we do see people, some of the people buying it, but we don't see a big market coming because the purchase issues which are there. Like I think the initial cost which is there, two-wheelers, I think Anup showed it's becoming more and more easier for people to own a two-wheeler now, but that's not the case for four-wheelers today. It's a little easier, but it's not all that easy today. But with technology and probably hopefully the costs coming down, we do see this change to happen. Whether or not it happens, you will still see vehicles coming in. Why would you see vehicles coming in is because the 2022 fuel economy regulation and going beyond that 27 and 32 will need a lot of electrification, whether it's electrified vehicles, electric vehicles or hybrid vehicles, it will be required. So we have to have this run up towards 27 and beyond. So we will need to have this technology, and we will need to have vehicles in marketplace and start testing the waters, and start slowly penetrating into the market and get customers interested in this, and also look at a value proposition which is there. So, but at the same time, we are worried about volumes. Unless and until volumes are not there, the indigenization, the localization becomes difficult, and most of the manufacturers, the OE supplier base is outside India for all of these technologies which is there. So, and they have set up their bases pretty well. And it's very difficult because they also are looking at volumes. So getting them into India and set up a plant here becomes all the more difficult, because their volume projections for the overseas plant, they have probably not met their numbers yet, and they do not see any reason for additional investments, say in India. So unless until these volumes grow, the costs coming down, customers becoming more and more interested in this technology, the numbers will not be seen. But we will see the technology. We will see manufacturers having their models in place and testing waters and slowly increasing the penetration, and also by that, complying with the next level of fuel economy regulations. When I talked about ethanol and and bio-CNG. These are technologies which I think India needs to harness. We cannot ignore these technologies. I think it's a huge advantage for India. You call it carbon zero by electrification. I would say there is another technology which is available. Why not to use it? And you can't have really a carbon negative technology as bio-CNG today. I really request Anup to do a study in this and actually look at how beneficial is this technology. So these are additional technologies which can help us achieve our carbon neutrality and GHG and whatever India in COP26 takes up as a target. I'm sure all of these technologies put together will help us in achieving those targets. So it is not one panacea for everything. So we'll have to work on multiple solutions for the same target.
Absolutely. Anup, you actually made a very interesting point that two things, that you actually expect that with the next rounds of revision of fuel economy regulations, a lot more electrification will be needed. It's something that the industry is already anticipating, right? And the second thing is the point that you made about the volume. And we also understand that in that volume, it is actually the two-wheelers and cars that will play a big part. And localization is possible only if you have volume, and also and to bring down the cost curve, etc. Now, from that perspective, and even though you are talking a lot about the intermediate solutions still, but we feel that I think we need to focus. I mean, intermediate solutions will happen, and Bharat is already doing a great job. I mean, in fact, your performance itself is so good because you have actually looked at a lot of those alternative solutions. But we feel that the time has now come to think about more disruptive and transformative changes. And perhaps it looks like, even though industry is so cautious, that perhaps the tipping point is somewhere closer than we think. Perhaps it's our gut feeling. And that's the question that I want to ask Anup from ICCT. Right. Anup, you have been watching the Indian market and the Indian industry for so long and the Indian regulations for so long. What's your sense? I mean, from the way the technology pathways are evolving in India and the way the kind of gains you have seen in both emissions and fuel savings and where the technology is today, does this give you a sense of confidence that perhaps things are going to happen sooner than we think? And for that to happen, can we have some additional strategies in terms of setting firm targets, firm mandates, so that we can really engineer that change when the opportunity and potential is so high?
Right. I think there are many threads here that sort of tie in. There are environmental and climate related objectives. There are industrial policy objectives about developing a competitive industry in India, not for today, but really looking ahead 10, 20 years from now. There is threads of energy security that we all need to be thinking about and so on. One sort of important and I think the useful thing is, if we set our expectations high, we will achieve them. If we set our expectations low, we will merely meet them. And the current transformation to Bharat 6 emission standards is one case in point. Even as 4 years ago, there were skeptics all around. Oh no, Indian refineries, they will never supply BS6 fuel across the country. That will not happen in India. Cannot happen. This India, so many problems in India, so poor country. How can India do this? Europe had so many issues supplying BS6 fuel. How will India do it? All this skepticism. And yet we did it. We did it on time. We did it in the middle of the lockdown. All the fuel was there from day one. We've done testing in 15 cities across India, petrol and diesel, before BS6 implementation, after BS6 implementation. And we saw this ultra low sulfur fuel supply across the country. And it was not just fuels, vehicles came as well. Yeah? No delays, no sort of phase-in period, this and that. Really a very strict target. When the country set that ambition at a high level, we managed to reach it. I think has got lessons in it for us. If we set the bar, so say, oh, so difficult to do, we'll do it slowly, etc., etc. Of course, we'll do it slowly, but we should recognize what India's capabilities are. And India's capabilities are much higher than we are giving ourselves credit for. So that's one thing. The second thing is, on the two-wheeler space, we are now starting to see the possibilities of disruption. And the introduction of models from companies like Ola, and Ola is even now talking about four-wheeler type of entry possibly. That's much harder, I would say, than two-wheelers. But nevertheless, we seeing that kind of disruption happening with electric vehicles. I mean, in the US market or European market, Tesla has really challenged all the conventional manufacturers to change their strategy. And actually, one after the other, every automaker, starting from Volkswagen on down, GM, Ford, everybody is really sort of had to respond and address. And we shouldn't underestimate possibilities of that kind happening in India as well. So unless we prepare for a glide path to going in that direction, we might be in for some really disruptive times. And I think that is not necessarily going to be so good. So what is really required is to set our ambition levels high in setting near term, but also long term efficiency targets. The trucks segment that Mr. Khanna talked about, right? Electrification, and by electrification I mean both electric trucks and fuel cell trucks, right? Not necessarily just electric. They are coming onto the market at much higher rate than we had anticipated just a few years ago. I mean, all of major manufacturers in the world, and then particularly China as well, but European and US manufacturers are now introducing medium duty trucks, heavy duty trucks that are coming to market with electrification as the trajectory. So when all this change and transformation is happening around the world, India really has to give a thought and to say, do we really think about India that we want to build 10 and 20 years out from today and work towards that ambitious goal? Or do we really want to sort of stay on sort of protected, yes, of course we are an emerging country. Of course we are still got years of economic development ahead of us in India. But I think matching those two is really going to be our challenge. And I think the opportunity is as big as we want it to be. So, we have to set our mind to it.
Absolutely, Anup. So before I just kind of do the concluding part, I think my colleague Vivek, are you there? Because I just wanted him to squeeze in few lines on that one critical actor, the consumer. And can you just reflect a little bit from what you have seen so far, that what can we do to leverage consumer interest, build consumer trust to be able to catalyze the market? So I think, very quickly in few lines. I'm rushing you, sorry.
So definitely for the passenger vehicles as well as two-wheelers, first choice, like generally in India, is for fuel efficient models. It has been over the years. But the consumer information system currently is very weak in terms of quality of information, comparative information, and the way it should be understood technically by the people in a simple terms. So I think that should be also given. Otherwise, setting the fuel efficiency norms, having the fuel efficient models in your dealers and or the manufacturers and will not help if the consumers don't buy. So I think in order to have fuel efficient models as well as electric vehicle models, we need to have clear and very thorough information in public domain. Thank you.
Thanks, Vivek. I would have loved to ask you more, but I understand, it's been so rich. And listening to the main key actors in the field has been so important for all of us today. And to have all of you together in this forum, I think that is really the power of this platform today. So it's been fascinating. So I will not even attempt to summarize what each one of you have said, but just reiterate the fact that when we had started the conversation today, there were a lot of, when we were a little uncertain, even we were not too sure, where are we going? Is there really an interest? Are regulators interested or not? We actually had that question in our mind. But at the end of the session, I must tell you, Mr. Khanna and Mr. Sharma, that how encouraged we feel to see you on top of it and so firm with what you are doing. And therefore, we'll certainly want to see that, you lead the way. And this is really the time and the crossroad in India. And when we are taking these decisions, if we can collectively, therefore, focus and pay attention to a good design of the regulation, because devil is in the detail of the regulation, as we have understood. So if we can pay attention to that, and what Anup said from ICCT, that we have to raise the level of ambition, and what Anup from the industry said, that at the end of the day, what matters is the volume in the market. So all of you have said it, and what Vivek is saying, that the consumer is the catalyst, right? So if all these pieces in the jigsaw today can come together, then I think the tipping point is sooner than we thought. And it is not so. In fact, this is going to be just not an environmental argument, but we certainly feel that it's the most powerful economic argument you have today in this country. And if we can lead this change with good regulations, good information, knowledge, and science, and where consumers are more aware, then automatically a lot of things are going to fall into places and the right things will happen. So with that, let me thank all of you, Mr. Khanna, Mr. Sharma, Anup from Maruti and Anup from ICCT, Vivek, and the audience for being so patient with us. And I know that the audience that we have today is a very well-represented audience. They really come from the sectors and the target groups who can really influence this debate today, including the officials from the states. So thank you, everyone. And we promise you, and I've seen the chat box full of comments, suggestions, we will take the initiative to respond. And wherever you have a question, we'll ask our experts on the panel and get back to you. So with that, thanks. Thank you, everyone. And bye-bye. Have a great day. Stay safe and stay healthy.
Thank you.
Bye-bye.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Thanks a lot.
Thank you, everyone.